It's nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Mr. Jeff Fountain. Jeff Fountain is a director of the Schumani Center for European Studies and the chairman of the Hope for European Roundtable. We are here to discuss about the soul of Europe. For many Estonians, we think that we belong to Europe as in the same cultural room. Does such kind of debates happen also in other states?
Not enough. I think this is a wonderful initiative, because we need to ask ourselves, what makes Europe Europe? Now, talk about the European soul was revived over 20 years ago by Jacques Delors. He was the president of the European Commission at the time. And he warned the leaders at the time. He said, if we have not found a soul for Europe within 10 years, and he said, I mean by that spirituality and meaning, then the game will be over. Now, we are more than 10 years past his deadline. The question is the game over? Is what we're seeing happening across Europe right now evidence that we haven't found the soul and the game is over? Now, why did he find that so important? Well, he realized that the European Union was actually founded on a vision of the soul of Europe. And then we've got to go back to the founding fathers, Robert Schuman, Konrad, Adenaueri, Alcide de Gasperi, and so on. Now, it was actually Robert Schuman who was recognized by the European Assembly, that's what we call the Parliament now, in 1957, as the father of Europe. Now, he was recognized as kind of prima inter pares amongst those founding fathers because it was his vision that initiated the plan for which there's a direct line to the EU of today. Now, he talked about the soul of Europe and he talked about the spirit of Europe. And there were slightly different words. Yeah. The soul of Europe, he said, is actually that which animated European culture and life and society, which came from a historical process. Now, you mentioned Portugal and other parts of Europe. When we ask ourselves, what made Europe Europe? And we talk about Europe as a continent, it has a very strong identity and history. We have to ask ourselves, where did that come from? Was it the Greek and the Roman tradition only? What role did that play? Well, when we look at the world map, we see continents, North America, South America, Africa, and so forth. But Europe's not a continent, it's a peninsula. It's the western peninsula of the Eurasian landmass. Now, our forefathers came from the east.
Indeed.
That's true for Estonians and the Finns, and it's true for those who lived in Holland, where I live, and even down there in Spain, the Vandals got all their way down there, and so forth. Now, came from the east. They were polytheists. Today is Friday, the day of Freya, the goddess of fertility. Yesterday was Donnerdag, or Thursday, the day of Thor, the thunder god, the day before the god of war. That reminds us of the worldview of our forefathers. Now, something happened that transformed all of that. And that was a message came telling the story of Jesus and of the Hebraic Christian God, who was a good, loving Father, Creator, and forgiving God. It's very different from all the other gods the Europeans used to worship. Now, that experience was experienced by people groups all across that peninsula, from Armenia through to Ireland, or Greece through to Scotland. Now, this common experience is what Schuman was referring to as being the soul of Europe. It animated a new way of life. It gave an understanding of us as created in God's image, and we're all brothers and sisters under the same God, and we need to love our neighbor as ourselves. Now, that is what gave Europe its basic commonality. Now, the spirit of Europe that Schuman talked about is the attitude that we today need to have towards this whole family of nations, family of peoples. And this is what we've lost sight of. You see, since the Reformation, we've had a breaking up, a balkanization of Europe. And then we've had balance of power, and the nations have fought each other, and especially France and Germany like alley cats, bringing in the rest of the nations around them. And because of that, we can't see the wood for the trees. We've got to dig deeper to discover the roots.
Yeah.
But modern Europeans try to say, yeah, we don't want to go back to the past. We want to decide our own roots. And so, for example, we have a secular newspaper, the leading newspaper in Holland, the NRC Handelsblad. They've been running a whole series on what makes Europe Europe. And so they're talking about ABBA and the Beatles and U2 and the Mercedes-Benz and all these fruits of the past. But we must dig down to the roots. Now, this is the conversation that's not happening. Our children are not taught about the roots. Our children are taught who won the war, but are they told who won the peace?
So 2,000 years later, now we are sitting here in Tallinn, and we should think about all this, which started 2,000 years ago and which has made us Europe.
Yes, because you see, people say, well, okay, we can all agree Europe has Christian roots. So what? Let's start again. Let's clean the slate. You know, look at all the religious wars. We don't want to go back there. Now, the question is this. What worldview is going to lead to the sustainability of the values that have made Europe Europe? Freedom, equality, solidarity, brotherhood, and so on. Now, the French in their revolution talked about liberté, fraternité, égalité, but they forgot, you know, you cannot talk about brotherhood, fraternité, without starting with fatherhood. Are there brothers who've never had a father? You cannot talk about equality and take God out of the picture. You see, Darwin talked about the survival of the fittest. There's no equality in that, you see. So when you take God out of the picture, it all crumbles away. And this is what's happening in our postmodern world. Unless we go back to these foundations, we do not have a basis for sustainability into the future. We talk a lot about sustainability. We don't want to talk about relational sustainability. And we've got to find those foundations again. And so we've got to come back to the ancient foundations that really made Europe Europe.
So thank you very much for those, I would say, inspiring words, Mr. Fountain.